Lecture 2, The Relationships of Spiritual Direction. Let us begin with a saying from St. John of the Cross. The virtuous soul that is alone and without a master is like a lone burning coal. It will grow colder rather than hotter. Simply knowing about what spiritual direction is should not be enough to satisfy us. In this lecture, we will explore 5 important relationships involved in the spiritual direction process. And we will also offer some pertinent observations about their significance for the Christian moral and spiritual life. The primary focus of spiritual direction is the relationship between the person seeking guidance and God. That is the primary relationship involving the entire spiritual direction process. But that is not to say that there are not other relations involved in the direction process that are not also important. Nor does it mean that these other relationships are never to be thought of as having priority in other areas. It only means that they do not have a priority of purpose in the helping relationship known as spiritual direction. People become themselves in the faith by bringing their relationship to God consciously to the fore and reflecting upon its most innermost details. So of the 5 relationships that we are going to explore, this is the primary one, the relationship between the person seeking guidance and God. So when going to direction, a person seeking guidance must keep in mind 3 interrelated factors: their understanding of themselves, their understanding of God, and their understanding of prayer. And the term understanding here refers not to some abstract conceptualization of these important dimensions of the spiritual life, but to an experiential, action-oriented awareness. And from such practical knowledge, certain key questions arise during the direction process, such as, how do I treat myself? How do I behave toward God? How do I pray? These questions touch essential dimensions of a person's relationship with God, and they must be given due consideration in the ongoing course of direction, although not necessarily with the same degree of intensity in every session. And these factors, however, only go so far when it comes to a person's relationship with God, because each of them must be turned on its head and directed towards God. So questions arise such as, who is God for you? What image comes to mind when you say the word? How does God speak to you? What does God want of you? What do you want of God? And then using this same imaginative process with the person before us, God will also be asked about his own understanding of himself, the person seeking guidance, and how he speaks to them. Such questions are extremely important because they underscore the mutuality of the relationship between the human and the divine. Those seeking guidance, in other words, are encouraged to explore not only their point of view concerning their self-image, God, and prayer, but also the point of view of God himself. And if the whole point of spiritual direction is to enable those seeking guidance to grow in friendship with God, then the marks of friendship, benevolence, reciprocity, and mutual indwelling must somewhere be in evidence. And if they are not, then something has gone awry in the person's relationship with God. Now, in addition to the relationship between the person seeking guidance and God, a second relationship comes into play. And that is the relationship, although not primary, of secondary importance in spiritual direction. It is the relationship between the director and God. In addition to this relationship, directors must nurture our relationship with God through appropriate means. The more we as directors nurture our relationship with God through appropriate means, the more will we be able to be in a situation to help those seeking guidance. And what does this mean in detail? It means seeking ongoing direction for ourselves. It means frequent recourse to the church's liturgical and sacramental life. It means nurturing mature, solid friendships and participation in the life of the Christian community. So if we value spiritual direction so highly that we are willing to give it, we should also be willing to make the time and the effort to receive it. And if we are not ourselves in the faith, how can we expect to help those coming to us to do so? As directors, we should also have frequent recourse to the sacramental and liturgical life of the church in order to deepen our own relationship with God. As directors, we also need the support of close, intimate friends for our psychological well-being and for our own development as mature human beings. And finally, as directors, we must foster our relationship with God in the context of the body of Christ. By tending to our relationship with God through these appropriate means, we draw closer to God in friendship and can thus be of service to those who come to us for direction. But in addition to the individual's relationship with God and the director's relationship with God, a third relationship comes into play. These are the relationships within God himself. The relationship among the persons of the Trinity must also be taken into account in spiritual direction. Such an observation may seem at first rather bold for the likes of ordinary, matter-of-fact dialogue that comes up in much of the time spent in this important helping relationship of spiritual direction. A closer look, however, at the statement reveals the extraordinary truth of the Christian faith. God became human, St. Athanasius of Alexandria tells us, so that humanity might become divine. The whole goal of spiritual direction is friendship with God, to share in the divine nature, a process known as divinization, or as the Greeks call it, theosis. God has visited the human race in Jesus Christ, and through his Spirit continues to inspire it by taking an active role in the helping relationship of spiritual direction. So the relationships of God are meant to be taken into account. God as Trinity, this loving relationship, which underscores the social relationship of God, is not something which is out there and not present in our lives, but it is meant to be present within us and also in the relationships that we form. To speak of the Trinity as relational is to emphasize the social character of the Godhead. The Christian God is a community of love, one in being, yet three in persons, ungenerated in its source, the Father, eternally generated in its otherness, the Son, eternally proceeding in its oneness, the Spirit. And the relationship between God and the Son is the Spirit. The relationship between God and us is made possible. We can become divine, meaning sharing in the divine nature by means of the Spirit. Our relationship with one another is meant to be a bond in the Spirit, and even our relationship with the world is meant to be forged in the bond of the Holy Spirit. So the Spirit is within God, the Spirit is manifest in our relationship with God, and the Spirit is manifest in our relationship with the world. In addition to these three relationships, the individual and God, the director and God, the relationships within the Godhead. We also have a fourth relationship, the director and the person seeking direction. And this relationship between the director and the directee is Christological in nature, meaning that the director, as Christ has done with us in his incarnation, passion, death, and resurrection, in the mystery of the Eucharist, the director seeks to enter the world of the person seeking guidance, give himself completely through a process of active listening, become nourishment for him or her, and also a source of hope. And so the director must ask himself, how have I entered this person's world? How have I given myself to him or her? How have I nourished him or her? And the directors must also say, how have I been a source of hope for her? How have I encouraged this person? How have I challenged him or her? How have I become a source of hope for him or her? So like Christ, directors are entered to enter the various worlds of those we direct, to give ourselves to them, to the point of becoming nourishment for them and a source of life-giving hope. And then finally, we have the relationship between God and those involved in direction. The relationships of the Trinity, this intimate community of love, which emphasizes the social fabric of the divine, is meant to be transposed onto the human level in the process of direction. In our imitation of Christ and the fourfold movement described just now, if that evokes from those seeking guidance a reciprocal response that at times has them entering into the world, giving themselves and becoming nourishment and even a source of hope for us, we must be conscious of the fact that there is a silent third partner in the relationship between the director and the directee. And this silent third partner is the mysterious triune God himself. Now, transposition only means something higher moving to a lower level. And what this means is not equivalence. It doesn't mean that God is actually present in his fullness there. It's not to say that we are becoming other gods. It says that we are sharing in the divine nature. It says that if we truly are created in the image and likeness of God, then our relationships, and especially the relationship involved in spiritual direction, this holy conversation between the director and the directee, that our relationships must in some way reflect the relationships of love within the Trinity itself. The transposition of the Trinitarian relationships onto the lower level of spiritual direction relationships results in a deep bond between the triune God and those involved in direction. Now, of course, because of inadequate training on the part of director, because of poor listening skills, because of unresolved personality conflicts, because of a lack of ongoing supervision, a lack of openness on the part of the person seeking guidance, overcommitments on the part of some common reasons for this lack of transposition. But that is not to say that when the direction process is carried out authentically, that the relationship between the director and the directee reflects the intimate bond of love present within God himself. And so let us conclude. It would be a mistake to think that these relations that I've just described are isolated entities, as if they only rarely interacted or entered into the direction process at separate intervals of a prearranged linear unfolding. At the same time, we should be aware that the relations themselves interrelate and that the various ways they do so is what gives each helping relationship of direction its unique identity. The mutual inherence of these relations gives the direction process a rich, multifaceted range of meanings that will never exhaust the efforts of those motivated to explore its hidden depths. So there are many relations that must be taken into account in the spiritual direction process, but I repeat, the most important one is the relationship between the directee and God. All the others, the relationship between the director and God, the relationships within God, the relationship between the director and the directee, the transposition of the relations of the Trinity onto the direction process, these other relationships must be kept in mind, but must never take precedence in a direction process, which is all about helping a person become him or herself in the faith. Let us conclude with some reflection questions. What relationship does spiritual direction focus on most? What other relationships are important? How do these relationships contribute to the process of discernment? How should they help you come to a better understanding of yourself? How should they help you focus on your relationship with God?